Welcome to another episode of Boring History for Sleep. Tonight, we travel back far, back to the sun-baked mud-brick courtyards and bustling ovens of ancient Egypt. But no, we won't be talking about pyramids or pharaohs tonight. Not really. Instead, we'll gently explore something much humbler and much too austere, the simple, surprising story of how Egyptian bakers avoided turning sacred grain into a charred disaster thousands of years ago. We'll peek inside smoky kitchens, decipher bread-shaped hieroglyphs, and fall asleep to the crackling sound of open fires and the steady rhythm of routine kneading, baking, waiting. From yeast rituals and flour taxes to the curious role of hippos in bakery planning, this is history at its most drowsy and doughy. So get comfortable, maybe pour yourself a warm drink, and drift into a time where the greatest worry wasn't politics or plague, but how not to ruin your temple ration of barley bread. This is Boring History for Sleep. Let's begin. You sit on a low stool in the shade of a mud brick wall, your linen tunic stuck slightly to your back with sweat. It's only the second hour of daylight, but the Egyptian sun is already full of intent. To your right, another scribe dips his reed pen into soot-based ink, tapping it gently on the edge of a small ceramic pot. Around you, the air smells of crushed papyrus, old sweat, and fresh clay. This, you think, is the smell of bureaucracy. The Nile flows gently just beyond the courtyard. Indifferent to your daily work, you don't build pyramids, or embalm the dead, or swing incense before the gods. You write, you record, you make the pharaoh's world legible. It's Egypt's old kingdom, the fourth dynasty. If you care for precision, Khufu reigns. Or perhaps his son, Jethafer. The sands shift slowly around dates, but the scribes remain constant. You and your peers are the kingdom's memory keepers, while artisans carve stone and peasants sow grain. You push symbols onto smooth flakes of limestone, bits of leather, or thin slivers of papyrus rolled tightly like scrolls and tied with sinew. But let's back up. Before the filing, before the writing, before any of it comes the ink, you, the junior scribe, must prepare it each morning. Crushed carbon for black, red ochre, sometimes for headers. You pour just enough water to make the mixture like paint, not so thick that it clogs the reed, not so thin that it bleeds. The reed itself is chewed to a point. The end must be soft but precise. It takes practice. It takes teeth. Everywhere, in temples, treasuries, dockyards, and granaries. Your particular post is in the grain accounting office of the royal estate near Memphis. You report to Nebhotep, an older man with a soft belly and a memory like a trap. He once corrected a tax list by quoting an entry from 2 decades prior, and he was right. He always is. Your job is to record grain delivery from surrounding districts. The Nile floods annually, and every year that flood leaves behind dark, silty earthcomet, the Black Land. Villages along the river owe a portion of their yield to the central government. It's your job to make sure no one cheats. Is weighed, stamped, and written into the scrolls. Here's how the process goes. A man, let's call him Men, approaches with a donkey cart piled with grain sacks. He bows, offers a scroll confirming his land allocation. You read it silently, noting the district. Perbastet, a small delta town. You check his identity against the registry. Mena is indeed the son of Ket, born in year 9 of King's reign. He has delivered grain before. A laborer lifts each sack onto a stone platform scale. Another worker balances it with standard stones known weights, stored in a locked chest, checked monthly for tampering. You note the weight. You inspect the seal on each sack, a lump of mud, impressed with a carved stamp, often tied with woven flax string. If the seal is broken or unfamiliar, the grain is rejected. You dip your pen and write, month 3 of Shemu, day 12, Mena, son of Ket, Probastit, delivery, 15 sacks of barley, weight, 512 deben, seals intact, signed, Nebhotep. A copy of this record goes to the regional official. One copy stays in your archive. That archive is your realm, your sanctuary. It's a windowless room lined with clay jars and wooden boxes. Scrolls are bundled by district and month, tied with linen ribbon. Courtyards of pottery with notes or corrections are filed by shelf. When the Nile floods and operations halt, you and the others spend those long weeks reorganizing the archive. It is the kingdom's most unglamorous act of devotion. But this is Egypt. Paperwork is sacred. Scribes are respected, even if their work is dry. In fact, dryness is preferred. The gods do not favor chaos. You sometimes wonder what happens to these scrolls once they're a few years old. Are they burned, reused, buried in boxes beneath temple floors? No one seems to know. Nebhotep shrugs when asked. Do not concern yourself with the end of scrolls. He says, concern yourself with their beginning. And so you do. You perfect the angle of your hieratic script. You cross-reference names. You track rainfall to estimate expected yields. You log how many donkeys carried grain per cart, and whether the guards at the gate offered bribes in exchange for ignoring a missing seal. All of it matters. Even if no one reads it, the other scribes talk of advancement. One hopes to move into temple administration. Another dreams of auditing gold shipments in Thebes. But your content here, with your ink pots and sun-dried ledgers, you find comfort in the repetition, and yet, lately, something has changed, twice. Now, you've noticed scrolls going missing from your archive. Not important ones, nothing from the treasury or central records, but smaller lists, delivery tallies from remote regions. You mention it to Nebhotep. He frowns and says nothing. Later that day, you find him copying an old list in his private chamber, lips pursed. Was it a mistake? Was it theft? Or was something being altered? And if so, who benefits from rewriting the kingdom's grain history? The next morning, the courtyard smells of damp earth. A light mist lingers near the ground, rare for this season. The other scribes arrive as usual, muttering sleepy greetings. Nebhotep is already at his desk, oil lamp flickering in the half-light. His face is unreadable, but his hands move with a touch more urgency than normal. You do your work without comment, though your mind lingers on the missing scrolls. Bureaucracy, by its nature, dislikes gaps. A scroll gone missing is not just a lost document, it's an absence of memory. And in Egypt, memory is sacred. To forget is almost a crime. Still, you do not press Nebhotep again. Instead, you begin your own silent investigation. You begin rechecking the tallies. Grain deliveries are usually predictable. Most villages yield roughly the same each year, barring drought or pestilence. Yet when you quietly compare Mena's current delivery to that of last year. A small discrepancy emerges. Fewer sacks, same declared yield. Curious, so you check others. Sebekotep from the southern canal district. Kantakity from the eastern marshes. Again and again, the same pattern. The number of sacks seems unchanged, yet the declared weight grows ever so slightly, year after year. Perhaps nothing, or perhaps clever cheating. Now you watch more closely. During weighing, you begin noting the sound of grain sacks dropped on the platform. Some land with a deeper thud than others. A few feel suspiciously light. You make quiet notes in shorthand, a trick your old teacher taught you using a modified system of dots and slashes. And then, on the fifth day, a new piece of the puzzle appears. A messenger arrives from the estate of a mid-level official, His Revered Honor, Senumka, overseer of the canal harvests. The messenger carries a sealed order, a request to revise 3 months of grain receipts from Probastet. The reason: clerical inconsistency. You recognize the seal on the wax. It's the same as one of the broken seals you flagged last week. You showed the order to Nebhotep, expecting confusion, or at least surprise. Instead, he nods. "I've already approved it," he says. "Recopy the scrolls and note them as amended by request, then destroy the originals." Destroy? That's not routine. Amended scrolls are normally stored alongside the originals, not erased from existence. You hesitate. Nebhotep raises an eyebrow. "This is not a matter for us. We are scribes, not judges. Our job is to record what is given." You nod slowly. But inside, you feel the sands shifting. That night, unable to sleep, you walk the short distance from your quarters to the archive room. A crescent moon casts faint light through the narrow window slits. Inside, the jars and shelves sit quiet as tombs. You open the Probastet section, pulling out bundles of scrolls by feel. Sure enough, the original Mena delivery scroll is gone. But tucked between 2 misfiled astraca, you find something else, an old registry from 2 decades prior. On it is listed a name: Mena, son of Ket, age 32, the same Mena from your current logs. If that record is accurate, then Mena would now be over 50. But the man delivering grain is clearly much younger. So who is pretending to be Mena? Next morning, you wait by the weighing station, pretending to inspect seals. When Mena arrives again, you ask to confirm his identity. He frowns, but produces the same delivery scroll. You ask a second question. The name of his father's father, he stammers. You thank him, right? No discrepancies on the form, and nod him along. But you now know this is not the same Mena. Possibly a nephew, possibly a placeholder, which leads to a deeper question. How many others are impersonating old names to maintain quota deliveries on paper, while funneling excess grain elsewhere? The scrolls, after all, don't ask questions. They merely record. And yet, the integrity of those scrolls gives the illusion that the system works perfectly, that every harvest is stable, that the state's bread will always rise. You remember Nebhotep's words? Do not concern yourself with the end of scrolls. But what if it's the beginning that is false? Later that day, you confront him gently. This year's Mena is not the same as before. "I know," he says without looking up. "We keep the name for continuity. Isn't that misleading?" Nebhotep sighs and sets his reed pen down. "Do you think the pharaoh needs to know how many men carry the grain, or how many sacks are lifted? No, He needs to know that the system works, that the stores are full, that the scribes are watching, that the numbers align. But if the numbers are wrong, they are not wrong. They are correct by design. You stare at him, unsure whether to feel betrayed or enlightened. Bureaucracy, it seems, is not merely a machine to record truth. It is a tool to manufacture it. Still, one question haunts you. If scrolls can be altered, seals faked, names reused, what part of the system remains real? Is the empire truly as prosperous as it seems? Or are you, the scribes, simply the last ones awake at the edge of a dream? The air inside the archive room is always slightly cooler than outside. It's the clay walls, they hold the memory of night longer than the sun can burn it away. Here, among the jars and cubbyholes, shelves, and tied bundles, you feel time differently. Not linear, but layered. Every scroll, a fragment of another momentum from last week. Others from the reign of a pharaoh, long since turned to dust. It's in this room that you begin to understand what Nebhotep meant. The illusion of continuity is more important than its actual presence. The ink may smudge, the seals may crack, but the narrative must remain smooth. Grain flows in, grain flows out. Nothing to disturb the still surface of the record. You settle into this rhythm with a peculiar comfort. There's even beauty in it. The act of recording, methodical, precise, repetitive, is strangely meditative. Each stroke of your reed brush follows a pattern. Hieratic signs curl like fish hooks. You use a fine grid to keep your spacing straight. You weigh your inkstone every few days to ensure consistency. But one day, the pattern breaks. A village delivery arrives with a new seal one you've never seen. It bears the mark of an official named Perduhem, a grain accountant from a distant nome on the edge of the delta. You ask about him. No one else has heard the name. When you check the seal against the archive, there's no record. Not in the registries, not in the payroll scrolls, not even a passing mention. You bring it to Nebhotep, who studies it, then shrugs. New overseers appear often. Perhaps a nephew of someone important. But shouldn't we have a record? You ask. We do now, he replies. With a flick of his reed pen, he begins a new entry. Perduhem, grain accountant, appointed in the 28th year of the reign of Pharaoh Jedkarisisi, stationed in the delta, duties, collection, sealing, inventory, review. And now, just like that Perduhem exists, you realize that history can be created as much as recorded. The act of writing is an act of authority. If it is written in ink, on papyrus, and sealed with a mark, it is real. No matter if the grain was late, no matter if the overseer was a fiction, the scroll makes it true. One evening, just before the festival of the inundation, you return to the records room and find Nebhotep sitting alone, rereading a scroll so old the papyrus crackles. This, he says, lifting it, is from my first year. A dispute over water access between two barley fields took 10 days to settle. I wrote 26 scrolls for it. Now both fields are desert. You nod, unsure of what to say. He continues, the illusion isn't deception, it's function. These scrolls are not truth, they are coherence. You understand now, the system you serve isn't built to uncover reality. It's built to keep Pharaoh's Egypt smooth, logical, orderly. If scrolls record steady yields, then the land is healthy. If deliveries are signed and sealed, then loyalty remains intact. If names repeat across generations even when those men are gone, then permanence is achieved. You begin to see the scrolls not as dead records, but as incantations, each one a spell cast to hold chaos at bay. A few days later, you are tasked with preparing reports for the annual grain audit, an event that will bring a regional inspector to your city. Your scrolls must be perfect weights, tallied, signatures aligned, seals intact. You work by lamplight well into the night. As you roll and tie the last scroll, your eye falls on a line that seems off, a name listed twice, two identical seals, but the weights differ. You open the bundle, two entries, same date, same village, same deliverer, an error, a forgery. You check against previous records. One matches last month's delivery, the other matches the new adjusted totals. You stare at the two for a long time, fingers still. This is not an innocent mistake. It is, as Nebhotep said, correction by design. The next morning, you bring the scrolls to him. He does not look up. File the revised one, burn the other. You hesitate. It's a mistake. You say quietly, it's a necessity. You pause, then ask, do we lie? Nebhotep finally meets your eyes. No, he says. We remember. Selectively, that afternoon, the inspector arrives, a man dressed in fresh linen, with a wide collar and a narrow smile. He praises the orderliness of your records, the clarity of your script. He calls you a model of scribal virtue. You smile, bow, and say nothing. He does not ask about missing scrolls. He does not ask about names reused or seals reapplied. He only wants to see numbers that make sense, and you have given them. As he leaves, you feel a strange mix of pride and disquiet. What does it mean to serve a system that creates its own reality? But then you remind yourself of something deeper beneath the illusion. There is still truth. Fields still yield barley. Canals still flood and recede. Bakers still rise before dawn to knead dough. The scrolls may twist those truths slightly to suit the needs of power, but they do not erase them. You are not a fraud. You are a keeper of the world's plausible shape. In your final weeks before reassignment, you begin a new project in Secreta, master index of all the scrolls you've handled. It contains footnotes, inconsistencies, silent corrections. You do not label it as truth or lie, only notes toward memory. When the day comes to leave, you wrap it in cloth and place it at the bottom of a shelf in the archive room behind a row of empty jars. Perhaps someone will find it, perhaps no one ever will, but the record exists, and in that there is comfort. Now, as you step outside and breathe the Nile air, warm and mineral-rich, you find yourself wondering, did the scrolls shape Egypt? Or did Egypt shape the scrolls? And how different are the two, really? You wake up before the light changes. The ground beneath your back is firm packed dirt, warmed slightly from the night's fire. A thin layer of ash coats the nearby stones. The remains of yesterday's heat. It's silent, except for the soft breath of sleeping neighbors and the distant lowing of cattle beyond the settlement wall. It is 6,000 years ago. You live in what modern archaeologists will someday call Keital Yuk, a dense Neolithic town on the Anatolian plateau. But to you, it's simply the place where the roof is near enough to touch and the walls hold paintings older than your mother's memories. Today is a clay day. You do not hunt, you do not fish, you do not smelt copper or track deer. Your hands are shaped for something quieter, flattening, coiling, smoothing. You are a potter. And in your small corner of history, that means you are someone who makes the shape of survival. You begin by walking to the riverbank, just as the sky begins to gray. It's not far, perhaps 20 minutes by foot, but it's an important walk. Along the way, you pass fields of immer wheat, small gardens of bitter greens, and the ash heaps where discarded pots have gone to crack and rest. Your eyes are trained to read the earth. You know which places offer clay that will harden well and which crumble into dust when fired. You also know not to take too much from the same spot. Clay is temperamental. You must not anger it. You dig with a wide bone spatula and a flat stone. The clay comes up cool, dense, slightly yellow with iron. You load it into a sack of woven reeds and tie it to your shoulder. On the walk home, you collect dung dry and flaky perfect for low, smoldering fires. Back in your workspace, you begin the ancient process of preparation, pounding the clay on a stone slab, mixing in fine sand and crushed potsherds to temper it. This is not done in haste. A careless temper ruins weeks of work. You kneel by your shaping board, a flat piece of polished wood, darkened by generations of use. You pinch the first ball of clay between your palms, rolling it into a coil. There is no wheel. Not yet. You build your pot from the ground up, coiling, smoothing, compressing each ring into the one below it. Your fingers dip into water only occasionally. Too much moisture weakens the form. The motion is repetitive, but not mindless. Every twist, every slight curve tells a story. This pot will be used to store barley. It must be wide enough to reach into, narrow enough to keep mice out. You have made thousands of pots like this, and yet each one is slightly different. You know the feel of a pot that will crack in the fire. You know the sound of one that will sing. Outside, a neighbor is plastering a wall with mud and straw. You hear children arguing over a broken toy. Farther off, someone sings a song you've heard since childhood. Nothing monumental is happening. No war, no grand hunt, no sacred rite, just daily life, repeated endlessly, invisibly. And this is what makes your work matter. Everyone will need pots for grain, for milk, for storing salted meat, for carrying water from the well. You are not a priest, not a warrior. You are not remembered in myth or written on tablets, but you make continuity possible. Your kiln is a simple pit lined with stone and clay. You build a dome over it with reeds and mud. There is no thermometer. You judge the fire's readiness by its color, the smell of the smoke, and how quickly a wisp of straw blackens when tossed in. You place the pot inside, careful not to let it touch another. A cracked pot still holds water, but not dignity. The firing takes all day. You stoke the fire with dry dung and bits of straw. The heat builds slowly. Your face glistens with sweat. You hum softly to the pot's not because it helps, but because your grandmother always did. By nightfall, the flames have died down. The heat now lives in the stones. You leave the dome sealed and wait. As you sit by the cooling kiln, you think about the hands that taught your hands, your mother, her sister, the elder down the street who used to mark her pots with circles pressed from a goose bone. You remember breaking your first pot by accident and crying for an entire day. You remember the first one that held water. You have never traveled far. A day's walk in any direction feels like the edge of the world. But through your pots, you have moved grain and water and meaning. You have shaped the texture of daily life. Tomorrow, you will open the dome. Some pots will survive, some will crack. You'll try again. That's the thing about potters. You learn by failing, quietly and often. And as the stars settle over your village, glinting dimly over the soot-stained rooftops, you wonder what will future people think when they find these pots. Will they know who made them? Will they guess the patience, the burns, the cold clay mornings? Or will they simply say, storage vessel, unknown maker, functional, Neolithic? You don't know. But perhaps that's not the point. Perhaps survival is the art. You wake before dawn again. It's the day after firing, and the air smells faintly of soot and damp clay. You rise slowly, with the sort of quiet anticipation one only feels after days of care and concentration. Today is not a day for haste. Pots, like people, emerge from the fire in their own time. The dome over your kill is still warm, just warm enough to melt dew. You check it with the back of your hand, then gently remove the mud cap, peeling it back like a pastry lid. Inside, a faint spiral of smoke lingers, carrying the scent of scorched chaff and mineral-rich dust. You see your work. Rows of humble brown and red vessels, their curves uneven but familiar. Not every pot survived. One collapsed inward like a startled turtle. Another cracked clean down the side. But most are whole, glowing faintly from within with the soft finish of earthenware baked by time and tension. You feel something, small and satisfied, settle inside your chest. You carry the first pot out gently, almost reverently, and place it beside your neighbor's wall, where the morning light will catch its ridged coils. Soon, others will gather to inspect the batch. Not for ceremony, exactly more like how villagers gather to discuss a neighbor's new goat, or the curious shape of a cloud. Half interest, half habit. As the morning passes, others arrive. Your cousin comes first, he always does, pretending to just be passing by, though he's clearly come to look. He lifts a small bowl with crooked sides and chuckles. Made. This one with your eyes closed. You shrugged. It's an old joke, but he sets it aside carefully. Then comes old Mezzy, a matriarch with more opinions than teeth. She taps a pot with her long thumbnail, listening to the pitch. This one's good, she says. Doesn't sing too much, won't shatter in cold. Her compliments are rare. You try not to smile. Pottery is not just craft, it is reputation. The style of your rim, the polish of your base, more lasting than any spoken name. Here in the village, people recognize you by your handles. You make them a little too thick, slightly sloped, easy for tired hands. Others make theirs elegant or fluted, but you prefer practicality. In some households, some sit solid and still, others rock slightly when jostled. These are the unconscious fingerprints of the maker. But lately, things have been changing. A younger potter, barely 16, is experimenting with painted slips. She burns wood too. A finer ash grinds red ochre and applies it in spiral patterns to her vessels. Not just marks, but art. Spirals, suns, even stylized goats. People love them. Her mother didn't either. Let the shape speak, she always said. Decoration is for walls and bodies. But now, those swirled designs are finding their way into trade bundles. They fetch extra grain. So now you are wondering, should you adapt or stay rooted in the form you know? In the evenings, after the clay is done, you sometimes sit near the council house, listening to stories. The older ones still talk about the time before settled life. They remember their parents' words of walking for days, following herds, watching the stars for directions. But for you, everything has always been still, grounded. There is no grand adventure in your blood. Instead, there is rhythm, consistency, the measured pressure of a thumb pressed against clay, the patience of waiting for things to harden. Still, a group came through the village from across the river valley. They brought honey in bark containers and spoke a dialect just strange enough to make people lean in. One of their traders noticed your pot, just a water jug. Nothing fancy, it to a donkey's back, next to bundles of obsidian and rough linen. That pot is probably miles away now. Maybe even in another settlement you've never heard of, sitting in someone else's dark little room, cradling barley or fish stew. There's something oddly moving about that. You are still here, but your work is walking without you. This morning, as you prepare new coils for tomorrow's batch, you pause to admire a new pot by the young woman with the painted spirals. It's delicate, maybe impractical, but it holds. Not because you need to, but because it feels like something the clay might allow. It's funny how pots change, slowly, over generations. Thinner walls, taller necks. Tried something small and different, and someone else noticed. It's not loud, it's not heroic, but it is a kind of legacy. Later that evening, as you sit beside your tools, you begin shaping a new vessel. This one's a little wider than usual, with a rim shaped like a bird's beak. It's subtle but distinct, a quiet rebellion. You wonder if someone will notice, if it will be copied, or if it will end up in a trash heap, forgotten like the others. But even that feels meaningful, because long after your name is lost and your bones are dust, this pot might still be here, buried, then found and held by strangers who speak in 1,000 strange tongues. They'll say, a Neolithic pot, fine coil work, rare handle shape, purpose unknown, the intent in the clay. And maybe they'll wonder, why did this potter change? The rim, what were they trying to say? You crouch in the dirt behind your home, sorting through sherds, fragments of old, broken pots. Some were yours, some were your grandmother's, some are so old no one alive remembers who made them, chipped and weathered smooth by sun and foot traffic. These fragments are not trash to you, they are memories. There's the shard with the burnished ridge must have come from that big stew pot you made 3 winters ago. You remember how proud you were of the even wall thickness. It cracked in a frost when someone left it outside overnight. There's another with your mother's thumbprint still visible in the clay, her print, frozen forever in the curve of a vessel, long since shattered and buried beneath onion peels. And there, a painted rim, one of the newer girls. Even in pieces, the red spiral still stands out against the tan body. You sort them loosely into piles, pieces that can be ground up for grog, bits that might be reshaped into beads, others that will simply crumble back into the earth. Nothing goes to waste. Even now, you feel the pull of a simple truth. Clay remembers. Centuries from now, archaeologists will puzzle over these fragments. Communal, decorative. They may guess correctly, or they may not, but they'll know this. The people who lived here were still, but not stagnant. They stayed, season after season, shaping earth into tools, into storage. Your settlement has grown in small, quiet ways. There are more children now. They chase chickens through the narrow paths between homes and leave handprints in the drying bricks that catch the light, and someone down the lane is trying to embed them into a pot lid. You're not sure how you feel about that, but it's interesting. At night, over lentils and boiled tubers, the elders talk about the future. Maybe one day, people will build taller homes with straighter walls. Maybe the river will change course. Maybe the forest will shrink as fields expand. Change always comes, eventually, but pottery remains. It breaks, it's fragile, but it endures. Your latest batch of pots sits drying on a raised mat behind your home. You inspect each one, tracing every rim with your finger. You've started adding a subtle mark on the basin notch, no bigger than a fingernail, carved just before the clay dries. For others, for you, your own quiet way of saying, I was here, I made this. That's the funny thing about legacy. It doesn't always look like a statue or a name etched in stone. Sometimes it's a jug that outlasts a lifetime, a curve that's copied for centuries, a design that reappears in some far-off culture because a traveling pot survived 1,000 miles in a donkey's pack. Your pots are part of a lineage, not of conquest, not of kings, but of hands and heat, of trial and error, of ordinary lives recorded not in ink, but in fired earth. You've heard there are settlements far to the east where pots are shaped on moving wheels. They say the walls are thinner, the forms more symmetrical. It's slow, yes, but slow like the rise of bread, or the settling of dust after a long walk. And in that slowness, you find peace. One evening, a group of children gathers around you. One of them has broken a water jug and feels terrible about it. You tell her it's all right. Pots are meant to be used and sometimes to be broken. You show her how to collect the pieces, how to examine them, how to find the story in the shard. You tell them every broken pot teaches you something. They nod solemnly, as if this is a great truth, and it is. Because what you've come to understand is that pottery is less about permanence and more about the cycle of effort, fragility, and quiet persistence. Like people, pots are made of earth, shaped by pressure, strengthened by fire, sometimes broken, but always full of purpose. A few weeks later, a traveler arrives with news. A new community is forming. They've begun building large, shared kilns. They want experienced potters to come and teach. The idea stirs something in you, not quite excitement, not quite fear. You've never lived anywhere else, but maybe it's time to walk, just a little. Not to leave behind your roots, but to carry them forward. You could share your handle shapes, your lid-fitting method, your slow, steady coil style. Maybe they'd laugh at a tour. Maybe they'd learn something. Maybe you'd learn something. It wouldn't take much, just a few pots, a blanket, a willingness to follow the path others have already worn. Because even staying put can mean movement. Eventually, one morning before you leave, you bury a few of your favorite pieces behind your home. A ritual of sorts. A quiet goodbye. Someday, maybe someone will dig here. Who shaped this pot stand? Why this way? In this place? At this time? Was it art? Was it habit? Was it both? And perhaps, for a moment, you'll be remembered, not as a name, not as a hero, but as a hand, a potter, a patient mind who shaped the earth. And that, you think, is enough. Imagine it's early morning in the Roman Forum. The vendors aren't set up yet. The sun has just begun to light the top of the Capitoline Hill, and the marble steps are still cool to the touch. But someone is already there, broom in hand, tunic tied high, an urban sanitation worker employed by the city of Rome. Your job is neither glamorous nor particularly well paid, but it is essential. The city depends on your brooms, buckets, and barrows, not just for appearance, for survival, because ancient Rome, for all its grandeur, produced a great deal of mess. Let's begin with the basics. Rome, in the 1st century CE, is a bustling metropolis, home to over 1 million people. There are public latrines, yes, and aqueducts, and drainage systems that would make your modern engineers nod in admiration. But there is also traffic, markets, pigeons, stray dogs, chamber pots being emptied out windows, and a whole population of citizens, visitors, slaves, freedmen, and children who create more filth than the Tiber can carry away. Your job sweeping the streets is part of a surprisingly organized civic structure. The Roman Empire believed deeply in urban management. There were aedus who oversaw markets and streets, curators who managed aqueducts, and below them, a hierarchy of workers like you who executed the practical tasks of keeping the city functional. Each day, you and a dozen others are assigned a portion of the city. Your team is responsible for a few streets, a section of forum paving, a couple of stairways, and at least one public latrine. It's not glamorous work, but you know the system. You start with the paved areas, using wide, straw-bristled brooms to gather dust, leaves, and miscellaneous refuse. This is the easy part. The difficult work is scraping. Here's a little-known fact. Marble steps become incredibly slippery when covered in olive oil, fish brine, or spoiled wine. And thanks to the frequency of spills, accidental and otherwise, much of your time is spent scrubbing dried muck from expensive stone. There are no synthetic cleaners. You use sand, vinegar, and elbow grease. Sometimes, for more stubborn grime, you heat water in clay jugs and pour it down before you scrub. You carry a curved scraper made of bronze or iron for hardened material. It's good for chewing gum, if gum existed. Yet, by midday, your shift moves toward the public latrina, large, open building with communal seats, a flowing water channel beneath, and a sponge gnostic system that you never touch unless absolutely required. Your job here is mostly to keep the floors dry, the smells manageable, and the benches from becoming, well, tragic. At least once a week, you help maintain the Cloaca Maximirome's massive, ancient sewer system. You don't go in. That job is for another class of workers entirely, but you ensure the grates stay clear. You collect leaves, feathers, cloth, bones, and any strange item that might block the drains. You found coins, earrings, wax tablets, once even a small ivory comb. Technically, you're supposed to turn them over to idols, but sometimes you don't. Everyone has to survive. Sanitation work in Rome is communal and hierarchical. Some days you get assigned to market duty, sweeping around meat stalls and vegetable carts. The butchers are your least favorite. They never clean up after themselves. Flies hum in greasy clouds. You learn to breathe through your tunic. Other days you work near temples where it's quieter. People tend to be more respectful there. They avoid littering in front of gods. You are paid not in coin, but in a ration, stipend grain, olive oil, and sometimes wine, enough to keep your family fed, though never richly. Occasionally, there's a tip, a merchant who appreciates clean steps, a senator's servant who presses a small bronze as thanks. But no one praises you loudly. You are the invisible hand that sweeps, scrubs, and scrapes, so others may walk proudly through a city they call Capet Mundi, the head of the world. Still, you have pride in your craft. You know which stones chip easily, which drains back up first after rain, which street corners gather the most litter, and how to clear them quickly before the midday sun bakes. Delicate art of balancing a full slot bucket while dodging children and chickens. You keep your tools in good condition. The iron scraper you inherited from your uncle also, Aphoricarius's, still sharp from weekly honing. In a world that praises conquest and senators, your work will never be inscribed on stone. No one writes odes to the sweepers of forums, but if you were to stop even for a datha, city would feel it. The stairs would slick, the drains would clog. To gods, statues to emperors, aqueducts that leap over valleys, but without someone to clean the mess left behind by daily life, all that glory crumbles into filth. That's the unspoken truth behind every empire. Someone has to sweep. Someone has to care enough to make the marble shine, to scrub the fountain edge, to collect the Hophiton fig left on the Senate steps. You are not a soldier, a poet, or a priest. You are a wielder. A silent architect of dignity, a steward of daily order. And yet, even as you scrape dried cheese from a pillar base, you wonder, how long will these forums last? Will anyone in the future know what it smelled like here on a summer afternoon? Will they think of you not just the senators or orators, but the one who swept beneath their sandals? By now, you've swept the Forum Boreum at least 100 times. You've memorized its smells. Fresh fish in the morning, donkey sweat by noon, and the oddly sweet stench of fermented fruit and urine wafting from the alley behind the olive cellars. You know which marble corner collects wind-blown bread crusts, which portico columns get marked by lazy dogs, and how quickly the stalls can dissolve into chaos if no one is around to keep order or at. There is a whole invisible scaffolding of sanitation that helps hold the eternal city together. Rome doesn't stay clean by chance. It stays clean because it is governed by layers of labor, oversight, and civic expectations woven into a system not unlike the Republic itself. At the top of this structure is the aedile. You've probably seen him, though never spoken directly. He's the one in the crisp toga, checking the market stalls and inspecting the paving stones, like he expects to find a conspiracy beneath them. Aediles are elected officials, technically responsible for public buildings, markets, games, and general urban order. But in practice, a big part of their job involves sanitation. They oversee the sewer maintenance schedule, approve funding for repairs to public toilets, and field complaints from upper-class citizens who don't want to see or smell the reality of Rome. Beneath them are curators, virum road supervisors, and curators, cloacarum sewer supervisors. These are less glamorous posts, but crucial. They keep the cloaca maxima flowing, the streets navigable, and the public fountains gushing. You never meet these men either, but they know of you in the abstract. Your name might be scribbled on a wax tablet or muttered at a bureaucratic meeting, but far below these marble-shouldered officials is a much more tangible figure in your life. The contractor. Most sanitation workers in Rome, including you, are not employed directly by the state. Instead, you're hired through publicana private contractors who bid for sanitation jobs and win temporary control over certain city sectors. This means your boss isn't a senator. He's a middleman, maybe a freedman or the son of one. He negotiates contracts with the government, then hires cheap labor like you to carry it out. It's a good deal for him. He gets paid a lump sum and keeps whatever remains after wages and supplies. For you, it's a bit less ideal. You are paid in food, housing maybe, and coin if your contractor is generous, which, of course, he rarely is. Sometimes, during festivals, bonuses are offered to keep things extra clean for the influx of visitors. But most of the time, the work is hard, the tools are worn, and the expectations are high. Still, you persist. You are part of a loosely organized crew, often a mix of slaves, freedmen, and citizens who've fallen on hard times. Some of your fellow sweepers used to be soldiers, others were born into the trade. One man you know used to be a scribe, a clerk, but lost a finger and can't write anymore. He now clears drains instead. You work alongside other specialty crews, each with their own tools and tasks. There are the latrone scrubbers, who maintain the public toilets scattered across Rome. These are remarkable places, with running water, sponge cleaning systems, and sometimes even heated seats in the wealthier neighborhoods. But they need daily cleaning. Your latrine crew carries buckets of vinegar water and long-handled brushes, often reeking of sulfur and salt. They joke that they are the most respected of the disrespected. Then there are the water workers who maintain the aqueducts and fountains. They're a bit better paid and often look down on you, even though your work is just as wet. Occasionally, you'll run into the cloaca sewer cleaners. These men descend into the underbelly of Rome with torches, scrapers, and little in the way of safety. They're tough, quiet, and rarely make eye contact. You once helped pull one out who had passed out from the fumes. He never came back, despite all this labor. Rome never truly feels clean. That's the nature of it. The city is a living thing, always shedding, leaking, rotting, and renewing. You sweep one forum, and another is flooded by wine barrels. You scrub vomit off steps after Saturnalia, only to find the vomiters already back the next night. You dream of a day when your broom will stay idle, a quiet day, a cool breeze across a perfectly polished marble square. But those are just dreams. What surprises you most, though, is how important your job has become to others quietly. Invisibly. Senator, whose name you don't know, always nods at you when he walks past your steps. A baker offers you bread if you clear the alley behind his shop. And during a recent festival, The priest at the temple of Vesta personally thanked you for sweeping the ash from the threshold before the ceremony. You still aren't praised publicly. But sometimes the recognition comes in a glance. A warm loaf, a longer than necessary sip from a shared cup of wine. There are, of course, hazards. Slipping on fish scales is a common one. So is cutting your hand on broken amphorae or rusty nails. You wear sandals with thicker soles now, after a week-long limp from stepping on an oyster shell. Once, a riot broke out in the Subura while your crew was sweeping a side alley. You spent an hour hiding behind a crate of spoiled figs, watching fire leap from roof to roof. Another time, a noblewoman's litter spilled its passenger when her bearers tripped over a slippery melon rind. The edile blamed your team for the mess. Your boss took the fine out of your food rations. Still, for all its mundanity, your work touches every corner of urban life. When Rome holds a triumphal procession, your team clears the flower petals afterward. When there's a wedding, you sweep up the confetti. When a man dies in the street, it's often your crew that washes the blood away. You are invisible, but everywhere. And so you find yourself, once again, scrubbing the stone basin near the market fountain. The water runs clear now. Your arms ache. Your back stings from the sun, but the forum is clean. For a moment, and tomorrow, it will begin again. Still, sometimes you wonder, what happened to the last crew before yours? Are there brooms buried somewhere beneath the paving stones? Will anyone 1,000 years from now know you ever swept these streets? The sun rises again over the Palatine Hill, just as it did yesterday and the day before that. You are already up, broom in hand, your sandals soft against the familiar cobbles of the Vicus Tuscus. The dust never rests, neither do you. But in this final part of your journey through the world of ancient Roman sanitation, it's worth stepping back to consider not just the work, but the long shadow it casts, one that stretches silently through time, mostly unseen, but undeniably there, because for all its grime, toil, and anonymity, your job, your life, is part of something larger, something that endures. Let's begin in the Cloaca Maxima, Rome's great sewer. Built as early as the 6th century BCE, it began as a drainage channel to carry water away from the Forum Valley. Over centuries, it became a symbol of Roman ingenuity, of the earliest large-scale engineering projects in the Western world. You've never gone inside, of course. Only the cloakery venture there. But you've seen the wide stone opening along the Tiber's edge where the murky water pours out. In a slow, determined stream, rainwater, kitchen scraps, urine, and gods know what else, all of it flows past in that dark canal. It is, quite literally, the digestive tract of the city. The cloaca was once cleaned by enslaved people using hooked poles and torchlight. They risked collapse, disease, and drowning, all to ensure the city above could continue its dignified charade of marble and order. Today, its walls are still intact. Archaeologists walk where the cloakery once crawled. They marvel at the craftsmanship. They write papers. They take photos, but they rarely say the names of the men who built it, or who cleaned it. It's the same with the streets. Roman roads were famous across the empire. All roads lead to Rome, as the proverb goes. But what people forget is that they were also cleaned by Rome. The practice of curare viastu, care for the roads, was more than just maintenance. It was an act of civic pride. Road sweepers, often assigned to individual neighborhoods or blocks, had to learn the rhythms of their space. Which gutters flooded during heavy rains, where trash accumulated after festivals, how to sweep dust without raising it into people's faces. And though these sweepers were considered lowly, even invisible, they were not without power, because when they didn't show up, everyone noticed. Let's pause on this idea, invisible necessity. Throughout Rome's history, you'll find traces of the janitor class, though rarely by name. We see them in mosaics, hunched and quiet, pushing crude brooms. We find them scribbled in graffiti. Marcus, the street wiper, smells like rotten fish, reads one childish insult from Pompeii. There are occasional inscriptions to a few freedmen who saved enough for a modest tombstone left behind their titles: Purditor, Cloakerum, Cleaner of Sewers; Scrutator, Virum Street Inspector; Curator, Latrine, Latrine Overseer. Simple words, chiseled into stone. And yet, how many senators' names have been lost while these endure? You may not think of yourself as a part of history. After all, you're too busy with your daily routine. Wake before dawn, sweep the forum, scrape gum resin from the paving stones, avoid the wine cellar's dog, eat a crust of bread, clean the latrine, nap in the shade if no one's looking, haul a bucket of gray water across the street without spilling it. Listen to a philosopher shout at a crowd that isn't listening. Sweep again. Go home. Repeat. It feels ordinary, repetitive, disposable. But remove even one of these moments, and the whole of Roman life stumbles. Who keeps the temples presentable for sacrifices? Who clears the forum steps before the senator makes his speech? Who ensures the baker's path is walkable, the doctor's door unblocked, the amphitheater clean after the games? You do, not the orators, not the generals. You and your influence, however quiet, lingers beyond your life. Consider this. Modern cities still echo Roman sanitation ideas: street-cleaning crews, public toilets, waste management hierarchies. Even the use of vinegar as a disinfectant, all of it has roots in the unsung systems of Rome. Your daily habits, shrinesing the brush, conserving water, organizing routes, wouldn't be out of place in a modern municipal training manual. And while few modern janitors will have ever heard of you, their work is haunted, in a good way, by yours. You created the template. You established the rhythm. You swept, and others learned to follow. You die one evening, quietly, no grand procession, no marble bust, just an empty broom leaning against a wall. A neighbor finds you, perhaps one of the bakers, perhaps the old woman who sells herbs near the temple. They bury you with a chipped oil lamp and one worn sandal, your name carved into a reused tile. It reads simply, Servius, cleaner of streets. May the stones be light upon him. And that's it. Those same streets archaeologist, tourist guide notices a small depression in the stone, a pattern worn smooth by centuries of footsteps and bristles. They wonder aloud, who used to walk here? And though they won't say your name, they're standing in your footsteps. The morning light filters through the reed blinds of your residence in the northern section of the Heian Court. It is filtered not just by bamboo and paper, but also by time and custom. This is not just another date, is another page in a life carefully structured by etiquette, beauty, and unbearable subtlety. You are a lady in waiting at the imperial court, somewhere around the year 1000 CE, living in the capital that would one day be called Kyoto. But for now, it is Heian-kyo, and its rituals rule everything. You begin your morning not with a jolt or alarm, but with a gentle sense of inevitability. Everything from the way you sleep to how you rise is governed by a code so refined that even sneezing at the wrong moment can cast social shadows. It's not exactly relaxing, but it is slow, soft, and rhythmically consistent. And to your modern ears, perhaps oddly, soothing. Your day does not begin with coffee, but with poetry, before you even rise from your thin bedding neatly arranged. On tatami mats your mind is already framing the color of the sky in metaphor, pale, cloudless dawn, perhaps like the collar of a favored kimono. Or maybe it's like the breath of a ghost drifting past your paper screen. Poetry is not optional. It is a survival skill. It tells others how clever, tasteful, and emotionally tuned you are. But also, it tells you how to process your world. You think in verse before you think in verbs. This morning, you compose a waka in your head while still lying down. Spring's first breath lingers, brushed on the reed blinds, shadow-like fingers on silk. A crane cries far off, unseen, stirring the stillness within. You will not write it down, not yet. It will float in your mind while your attendants prepare the day. Next comes the robe ritual. You do not dress yourself. Two younger maidservants carefully assist you, layering silk upon silk, perhaps 12 layers or more, depending on the season and your mood. Today's base layer is white. Over it comes pale green, then a petal pink, a deeper violet, and finally a translucent outer robe embroidered with chrysanthemums. The colors must reflect the season, but also your rank, your personal taste, and even your emotional availability. The weight of the robes presses on your shoulders like memory. You are dressed to be seen, but only just. You will spend most of your time behind blinds, your form hidden, your voice filtered through folded fans. Yet your sleeves, those carefully visible layers, speak volumes. They whisper on your behalf. They say, "Here I am." Do not look directly, but do not stop looking. Hygiene, of course, has its place, contrary to popular assumptions. Heian aristocrats were deeply concerned with cleanliness, though within specific parameters. You rinse your mouth with a bowl of warm, slightly scented water. You chew on pieces of aromatic wood to freshen your breath. You apply rice powder to your face, not for beauty, but for propriety is improper to appear flushed or too alive. Baths are infrequent, but when they happen, they are elaborate. You do not use soap. Instead, a mixture of rice, bran, and herbs is rubbed gently over the skin. Today is not a bath day, so your attendants freshen you with warm cloths and reapply powder. And yes, there is a chamber pot, discreetly tucked away behind a folding screen. Its presence both entirely essential and entirely unmentionable. Waste is removed quietly by a lower-ranking maid. No one ever talks about this, but the system works. You take your place in the women's quarters, a soft, shaded room with tatami floors and rolled blinds. The screen in front of you filters your view of the garden, cherry blossoms, a flicker of pond, the occasional turtle sunning itself on a stone. A companion brings in incense. This morning, it's a mixture of a loose wood and cloves, prepared the night before using a tiny charcoal brazier. The The scent is both meditative and practical. Lit masks any lingering smells of rice, ink, or the human body. More importantly, it signifies the transition into a composed state. Without incense, you are still part of the domestic world. With it, you enter the aesthetic one. Now, and only now, can you begin correspondence. Writing is your currency, your arena, your mirror. The brushes are fine, the ink freshly ground. You write not in Chinese characters, like the men at court, but in kana, cursive script derived from those foreign glyphs but shaped by and for women. You compose short notes on folded paper, meant to be delivered to lovers, rivals, and distant friends. A poem, a memory, a subtle dig. Each note must balance elegance with enigma. Too obvious, and you seem vulgar. Too obscure, and you seem cold. The choice of paper matters. Perhaps a pale lavender slip today, with pressed flowers embedded in the fibers. The brushstroke, too, must flow just imperfectly enough to suggest spontaneity, but not carelessness. By mid-morning, a reply may arrive. A courier, usually a servant boy, delivers a folded paper on a lacquer tray. You do not open it right away. That would seem desperate. There is no breakfast, per se. Eating is irregular and mostly unceremonious. You nibble pickled plums, or take a bite of cold rice, if offered. But meals are largely background events. Food is not where you seek pleasure. That's what poetry, gossip, and incense are for. You will eat more later, perhaps. If you remember now, comes a visit from Lady Toshiko, your closest confidant. She arrives in a rustle of dark blue robes and a fan embroidered with moon rabbits. You sit behind your screen. She sits behind hers. The conversation floats between you like drifting incense smoke. It is slow, soft, and coated. You speak of the emperor's new consort, her taste in robes, her poor handwriting, her scent which, Lady Toshiko notes, leans far too heavy on sandalwood. You discuss a novel you're both pretending not to be reading. You recite your morning poem. She recites hers. It is not a contest, but of course it is. You both laugh softly, a laugh without teeth. Hours pass in this quiet world of brush, silk, and sidelong glances. Occasionally, a messenger from a courtier male, ambitious, poetic, sends another folded note. Sometimes the notes are sweet, sometimes absurd. Occasionally, one is crude, though never so crude that you can accuse him of it. You craft your reply carefully. You choose the ink with the faintest green tint. You fold the paper like a lotus bud. You spray it lightly with plum blossom water. A message scented afternoon approaches. The sun slants through the blinds. Dust motes dance in the golden air. You feel the weight of your robes more now. One of your attendants removes a layer or two. A musician plucks a koto in another room. The sound threads through the paper screens, like the last edge of a dream you can't quite recall. This is your life. Repetition, refinement, restrained expression, beauty within silence. Outside the palace, the world is rougher. Peasants labor in fields. Merchants haggle. Servants rush from errand to errand. You don't think of them often, nor are you expected to. Their world is practical. Yours is symbolic. You embody ideals, not realities. And yet, isn't there something real in that, too? In devoting a life to nuance, tone, texture, in understanding that a sleeve's color can speak more loudly than a shout, or that silence itself, if shaped carefully, can say everything. But now the light fades, and with it comes the hush that precedes. Evening dot, there is more to come, rituals of twilight, of sleep, of longing letters sent under moonlight, but that, perhaps, belongs to another time. For now, you sit quietly, the smell of incense still clinging to your sleeves, and wonder, what does it mean to be remembered not for deeds, but for presence? As the sun disappears behind the cypress bark roofs of Haeyonkyu, your world shifts into a new mode, half-lit, half-hidden, and wholly, ritualized. Evening is not a time for closure in Haeon Court. Life lit is the beginning of the most delicate part of your day. The rest was merely a prelude. Now, with the moon rising and the wind softer, the emotional currents intensify. This is the hour of longing, where a man's ambition takes the form of poetry, delivered across the threshold, where a woman's wit and grace are displayed through indirect conversation, scent, and the silhouette of her sleeve behind a screen. Romance is never about sight, it is about suggestion. You are seated once again behind your bamboo blinds, this time facing the garden, where the cicadas have started their nightly orchestra. You listen not just for their rhythmic worry, but for footsteps in the gravel path, a soft, practiced tread of a courtier arriving after dark. Your attendants light a single lamp with a wick made of twisted mulberry paper dipped in oil. Its glow flickers across the silk folds of your robes. You smooth them absently as you wait, the scent of a loosewood still lingering from the day by now. The world outside your blinds is transforming, not into something darker, but into something more interpretive. The first letter of the evening arrives not from your regular correspondent, but from an ambitious cousin of a mid-level court official. He encloses a poorly composed poem about the moonlight on his sleeves. You smile politely. Your maid, too familiar with these theatrics, rolls her eyes discreetly. You will not respond. Instead, you turn to your lacquer writing box. Inside, a fresh brush, inkstone, and several folded slips of soft-dyed paper. Your favorite is a light gray with gold flecks, reminiscent of distant stars. You grind ink with practiced patience, the rasp of stone on stone filling the silence. This next letter matters. It is to Lord Michinari, the only man at court who has ever referenced your poem about the fox in the snow. He is clever too, clever but not unkind. His letters are filled with double meanings and misty metaphors, but you always sense the true feeling beneath. Tonight, your message reads, "From this side of screens, I watched the crescent withdraw behind drifting clouds, but still, its silver lingers a memory on the sleeve." You sign it with a stylized version of your name, never your full name, of course. That would be too direct. You fold the note, sprinkle a trace of plum blossom water on the crease, and instruct your attendant to deliver it quietly under cover of darkness. This, in essence, is Haeon courtship, not flowers and gifts, but folded notes and overheard sighs. A single evening might contain half a dozen such exchanges. And yet, if one message goes unanswered, if a reply is late, or the paper seems hastily folded, everything can unravel. Scandal is always waiting behind the curtain of decorum. A woman must never be seen visiting a man's quarters, but a man may come calling under strict conditions. He must arrive in secrecy, leave before sunrise, And above all, his presence must never disrupt the lady's household. It is an elegant farce, but one with high stakes. To be known as too eager is ruinous. To be known as indifferent is equally dangerous. You must appear caught between worlds, tempted but untouchable. You hear the wind shift outside. It carries the scent of magnolia and wet earth. Then a new sound, a single cough, practiced but soft. It is the agreed signal. Lord Michinari has arrived. You do not rise. You do not call out. Instead, your maid admits him through the side gate. He enters your residence silently, removes his outer robe, and sits behind a second screen, several paces from yours. You are both concealed, but the presence is unmistakable. Now, the exchange begins. You speak without direct address. You mention the late hour, the rising mist, the noise of frogs in the canal. He responds with a poem about the pale color of your blinds. You answer with a haiku about dewlap and grass. He praises your handwriting, your scent, your knowledge of obscure court customs. You deflect. You offer a story about Lady Seishanagon and the time she ranked fans by the sound they made when snapped open. He laughs genuinely. For a moment, the screens might as well not exist. Still, propriety holds no matter how many layers of silk have been removed to tonight. Due to the warm evening, you remain behind your veil. Only your shadow is visible. You might offer your sleeve, a brief hand gesture, the sound of your breath, but you do not cross the line. Crossing. It is not forbidden, exactly, but it must be earned over many such evenings. And even then, you risk more than heartbreak. You risk reputation. And in Hyeonkyo, reputation is survival. So, instead, you speak of dreams. Dreams where you walk through snow without footprints. Dreams where you sit beside a river and cannot cross. You ask him what such dreams mean. He says, perhaps it means you were waiting for someone to build a bridge. You reply carefully, bridges can be swept away. Later, he leaves well, before dawn. Your maid returns the next morning with a note he left at the gate, wrapped in a branch of pine. It reads simply, a brief bridge. Yes, but I would still walk it twice. You fold it slowly, place it with the others in your writing box. You do not smile, but perhaps your breath catches just slightly. Elsewhere in the residence, other women are writing, reading, or quietly weeping over lines of poetry too beautiful to bear. You walk to the back veranda, where the night's final breeze carries hints of rain. The paper screens flutter. Somewhere in the garden, a fox calls out. You think of how much of your life has been lived through layers of silk, of blinds, of metaphor. You think of how little has been said aloud, and how much more has been communicated anyway. This is not a life of action. It is a life of perception, of exquisite restraint. And yet, there is something unsettling under the surface. You wonder, what if all this poetry and protocol, this quiet war of messages, nothing more than a performance? What lies beneath the ritual, beneath the robe? As you return to your sleeping quarters and lie under your silk coverlet, the question lingers like incense in the folds of your sleeve. In a world so carefully veiled, is it possible to ever truly be seen? It is past midnight in Hyeonkyo, and sleep, as usual, comes slowly. For a woman of the court, nighttime is not a restful retreat, but an extension of the day's rituals, quieter. Yes, but never still. You lie on a bedding mat of layered silk. Over tatami, your head resting lightly on a lacquered wooden block padded with a folded cloth. It is more symbolic than comfortable. Your chambers are still perfumed from the earlier incense ritual. The paper lanterns are dimmed but not extinguished. Just enough glow remains for the eye to catch movement, a flutter of a sleeve, the shadow of a moth from the outer corridor. You can hear muffled conversation, two attendants exchanging low gossip over a pot of lukewarm rice wine. One of them mentions that Lady Kureha tripped over a cat again during the evening incense ceremony. The other huffs, that woman cannot keep her sleeves out of anything. You smile slightly, even in darkness. The court does not truly rest. Attendants drift from room to room, carrying pitchers of warm water or folded robes for tomorrow. The outer screens are latched to keep out the mountain wind, but they creak in protest anyway. Somewhere nearby, a nightingale gives a single liquid chirp and falls silent again. You rise quietly in the narrow hallway adjoining your chamber. A brass basin has been filled for your midnight bath, a small affair, not a true immersion, but more of a symbolic refreshment. The water has cooled, but it still bears the subtle scent of camellia. Your maid helps you disrobe 6 layers tonight, each one folded carefully on a cedar chest. The chill against your skin is immediate, but it is also grounding. As you sponge your arms and shoulders, you think of the others in your rank who perform this same ritual at roughly the same hour. Each woman enacting solitude behind separate screens. You wonder how many of them also feel the weight of silence, pressing down in the hours before dawn. Returning to your room, you pass the small cabinet that contains your chamber pot, a porcelain bowl with gold-painted reeds across the sides. Not the most elegant item in your household, but necessary. Even here, grace is enforced. No shame, only control. The pot is emptied every morning by a maid who never comments on its contents. A lady must maintain her poise even when no one is watching, even in the most intimate corners of her day. This, too, is a performance. Back in bed, you turn your attention to your pillow book, a personal diary, but also a collection of impressions. There is no narrative, only lists and fleeting thoughts. Things that are elegant, the way a cherry blossom petal floats onto a scroll, the shadow of a screen moving at dusk, a gentleman's fan painted with mountains in mist. You flip to a new page and begin another list, things that are faintly disturbing. When incense smells like burnt sugar, when laughter comes from an empty room, when you dream you are seen without your robes, you pause, then cross that last one out to revealing the hours. Drag, you cannot sleep. You think of Lord Missionary's letter from earlier and wonder if he writes such lines to other women, or if the pine branch was truly meant just for you. You think of how many years you've spent behind blinds, learning to interpret glances, tones, and the folds of paper as if they were whole conversations. And yet, what has it all amounted to? You are respected, perhaps admired, but never quite known. Everything is layered: robes, metaphors, barriers, expectations. You have rarely stood in sunlight. Even your voice feels borrowed in the stillness. Your thoughts wander to the outside world, a place you know more by rumor than by experience. The capital is quiet now, but earlier in the day, news filtered in flooding in the rice paddies near Uji, delays in the delivery of silkworm cocoons, A dispute between two provincial governors over border grain stores. These events are distant. They do not touch you directly, and yet they shape the world you inhabit like the unseen frame behind a screen painting. You realize, not for the first time, how much your comfort depends on the quiet suffering of others, those who labor in fields you will never see, whose names are never recorded in poems. You close the pillow book, unsure whether to feel satisfied or hollow. To distract yourself, you mentally review tomorrow's schedule. Dawn incense, a calligraphy session with Lady Yukiko, a poetry challenge in the West Chamber, a lecture from the visiting monk about the nature of impermanence, another visit from Lord Michinari. Weather holds. Each of these items offers both structure and emptiness. Each is a kind of silken repetition. Just before morning, your maid brings in a soft millet porridge, served in a shallow black lacquer bowl. You eat slowly, more out of tradition than hunger. You sip warm tea, steeped with a single chrysanthemum petal. The bitter taste lingers. A gong sounds faintly in the temple district beyond the palace walls. You rise, stretch, and prepare for the layers of the new day under robes, outer robes, and the endless roll of poised elegance. A life of exquisite presentation, where even your yawns must be hidden behind a fan as you sit before your mirror, watching your face re-emerge under layers of powder and rouge. You ask yourself the question that every noblewoman eventually must. If you've lived your entire life behind a screen, how do you know which part of you is real?